for those who maybe can't be here, again, it's focusing on regional assets. We're doing these webinars quarterly through the NATO Research Foundation as part of the Economic Development District Community of Practice, which is a program funded by the Economic Development Administration. And I'm excited you're all here. We're gonna do, well, this is me, Melissa Levy. I'm at NATO Research Foundation, focusing my work on wealth creation, really spreading the word, doing outreach, education, training around wealth creation. So, and let's see, oops. And here is just some quick information about NATO and the NATO Research Foundation. NATO provides advocacy, education, research, and training for the nation's regional development organizations. And the Research Foundation really provides the education, research, and training designed for those folks also. And it sounds like somebody, if you can like mute yourself, I hear kind of some background noise. And I also wanted to share this is some resources around wealth creation. This is still the comprehensive site for anything related to wealth creation. This is the original site. It has a ton of really great information. It has learning modules, there are videos, there are case studies, all sorts of resources. And just wanted to share that. This is the NATO Wealth Creation website, which is something I've been working on, and it's really focused on wealth creation for economic development districts and regional development organizations. There are some interesting reports on there. There are training materials. These webinars are posted on this site afterwards with slides and the actual recording for those of you who have to leave early or are missing it. And then finally, we're hosting the first EDD Wealth Creation Summit in Greenville, South Carolina this summer. It should be really fun. I'm really excited about it. We have a lot of really interesting content planned. So if you have any interest, go to this website and register. It's pretty small, it's meant to be a kind of a smaller group. It's not like a giant conference. So there's really like kind of interactive workshop-y kinds of things, panels. We're doing a great mobile workshop. And here's just some housekeeping. Please feel free to put questions or comments in the questions or the chat box. Feel free to introduce yourself, like who you are, where you're from. And like I said, we will have a recording of the webinar made available at that wealth creation site. And there will be a post-webinar survey just to, provide feedback for those webinars that are forthcoming and for the programming that I'm hoping to do. And I am your contact for anything related to wealth creation at NATO and outside of NATO too. So I just had a couple of quick poll questions I thought we'd do just so we know who's here. One is about where you're from, and that's by EDA region, since this is kind of an EDA program. So if you can just do that so we can see who's with us, that would be great. I'd just like to know who's here. Okay. Give you another minute or so.
Well, my name is Saul Benkole with the city of Opelika here in South Florida, manager of economic and community development.
Okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're almost let you finish up, and then we will, I guess maybe we'll end now. So it looks like we've got a good mix, definitely more from Seattle, looks like Seattle, Chicago, Philadelphia. That's my neck of the woods. Okay, great. Thanks for doing that. We have one more. I just wanted to understand who, again, who's here, like what kind of organization you're with. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, we can see who we're talking to. Looks like mostly EDDs, which is not surprising. Again, this is for the Economic Development District Community of Practice. So oh, the poll results are not showing. I don't know how to fix that. Oh yeah, okay. Okay, so just another minute. Oh, you said, okay. Thanks. All right, so it looks like, again, not surprising, mostly economic development districts or regional development organizations, some local governments, some nonprofits, some educational institutions. Fantastic. Can you all see that before I close it? Okay. Perfect. And yes, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. But I really appreciate you. It's just helpful to know who's around. Today we're going to be hearing from Kade Jones, who's the regional planner from Acadiana Planning Commission in Louisiana, and also Eric Smith, who's the executive director of Great Lakes Urban Restoration Network. And again, I'm Melissa Levy. I'm really excited you're here, and I'm excited to have these two talking to us about, asset-based development. And I just wanted to, again, reiterate for those of you who may not be familiar with wealth creation, just a couple of slides just to kind of ground us in what we're talking about. This is an approach to economic development that connects a region's assets to market demand. It's about building rooted wealth for regional or local people, places, and firms. And it's at the nth degree, it's about building a sector rather than individual and unrelated businesses. But there are a lot of ways you can play that don't involve sector strategies. So these are the principles that I just talk about over and over again. It's about creating wealth, aspiring to do no harm to that wealth, rooting wealth in local people, places, and firms through regional ownership, control, and influence, and building lasting livelihoods. And this framework was developed as a way of thinking about economic development differently, especially for those high poverty rural areas. Originally, it was developed to work in the highest poverty areas. It was started with working in Central Appalachia, the Deep South, and the Texas-Mexico border region. And since then, it has expanded throughout the country. And when we talk about wealth, again, here are the 8 forms, the 8 capitals that we're talking about and that we'll continue talking about throughout this webinar. And these are, meant to be pretty comprehensive. And it's not just financial wealth, it's not just money, but all the different things that communities have. I think this focus on these different capitals really provides a way to talk about both tangible and intangible assets in rural communities, and really allows for rural communities to see that they have assets to talk about and to take them out of a deficit mindset that others might put them in. So, and we use these capitals in a lot of different ways. One is just understanding what we have, so inventorying and assessing. Another is actually designing strategies. And then finally, we use it in measuring outcomes. And there are a lot of examples of all of these. There's a written piece that I put out specifically about focusing assets that you can find on the NATO website. And then I've also been thinking about, how does wealth creation connect with EDDs? Like, how do EDDs connect with this concept? And so these are the ways that I've been thinking about it. One is through the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, or the CEDS, through the SWOT analysis, or the alternative like the SOAR analysis. Another is through measuring outcomes, the evaluation piece of the CEDS, and we're also seeing it in some of the strategies as well. And then this kind of sector-specific work, which is really about helping sectors collaborate for mutual benefit. And there are some really interesting examples of that. And that's what our next webinar in September will be about, is these sector strategies. And then finally, value chain development. I have a piece that will be coming out soon that really focuses on value chain mapping and figuring out how to do that and then how to fill gaps in that chain. And we'll probably talk about that in the last webinar this year in December. So I'm excited about that. But today we're focused on this first piece, not necessarily CEDS, but this focus on assets. And this slide is in here too. As you think about integrating the WealthWorks approach, these are some of the hubs around the country that are supporting this framework. And if your state is not represented in one of these geographic areas, definitely I'm here to support those who are not covered by maybe another hub. And this is me actually up in the Northeast, that's actually me. So so I have one more poll question for you, and then we're going to get to our speakers. And this is really about like assets, like what the idea is, what are your region's strongest capitals? And I know it's a hard question. It's not easy, but I would love if you would just take a minute and think about, your place and what you think is strongest. Excellent. Wow. All right. We'll close it in a second, but give you another minute to finish completing this. I know it's a lot to process. I see natural capital is pretty high. That's not uncommon in rural places, right? But I'm also pleased to see social, intellectual, cultural, and individual are pretty high too. And I think in the experience that I've had, we often say that social, intellectual, and individual are kind of the foundational capitals. If you want to do anything, you kind of need to build those first, which I think intuitively makes sense, right? Individual is all about skills. Intellectual is about those new, exciting ideas. So you kind of need the knowledge and innovation to create new ideas, then the skills to actually operationalize them, and then the social capital and the kind of trust in networks to make them actually happen. So that is impressive. Thanks for playing along. Hoping you can see this. Okay. Great. All right. Excellent. So we have Kade here. I'm really excited. Kade Jones is a regional economic development planner at Acadiana Planning Commission. He works on economic development, grant writing and administration, and strategic visioning within the Acadiana region of Louisiana. He's worked on the CEDS, which I'm really excited for him to tell you about because their new CEDS is really exciting and really takes a wealth creation approach throughout. So I am going to stop sharing and I'm going to let Kade share his screen and tell you what's going on in Louisiana.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be able to present this information to you today. As Melissa mentioned, I am a regional planner in the Acadiana region here at the phone. I went to LSU and got a master's degree in landscape architecture. While I was there, I did a round of planning courses, and I worked on a planning thesis in a rural town in Louisiana called Arnaudville, right outside of Lafayette. Arnaudville was recognized as one of 14 cities or towns throughout the U.S. that exemplify creative placemaking, which is a National Endowment of the Arts designation. So I got to work on that thesis, and they pointed me to the Acadiana Planning Commission and said, well, this would be a great organization for you to join to continue some of that work. So I started there in 2019, and I will attempt to guide you through my experience chronologically, because that is how I tend to present and, tell a story the best. So a little bit about my organization, the Acadiana Planning Commission. We are a regional planning commission, or an EDD. We're a quasi-governmental multi-service agency that serves the public sector throughout the Acadiana area. And you can see that map is our primary planning district. We focus on promoting economic development and growth, strengthening communities, and improving transportation and more. We are designated by EDA as an EDD. We are designated by FHWA as the Acadiana MPO, or Metropolitan Planning Organization, and we are designated in the state of Louisiana as Louisiana Planning District number 4. So we get to work in this really kind of unique space because we're not federal, we're not state, and we're not local. And we kind of move around in between those different spaces, which can be really beneficial whenever you're doing planning and grant seeking and things like that. So before I got to Acadiana Planning Commission, there was an important initiative that took place. It was a partnership between the local regional chamber of commerce. They are called One Acadiana. They're kind of like our sister organization, and we work really closely with them. And my office, the Acadiana Planning Commission, partnered to form Invest Acadiana. And the purpose of Invest Acadiana was to promote the Opportunity Zone investment in the Acadiana region. For those of you, most of you probably are, but if you're not, basically an Opportunity Zone is an economically distressed community where new investments under certain conditions could qualify for preferential tax treatment. They were created to spur economic development and job creation in low-income areas by providing tax incentives to investors. So the Invest Acadiana initiative put together a series of prospectuses. They made one for the Acadiana region, and then they made one for the city of Lafayette. When I joined APC, we were just getting into doing the University Gateway Cultural Opportunity Zone prospectus. That was essentially, this is an opportunity zone that is right outside of the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, ULL, not to be confused with Louisiana State University. Both are great institutions, but our institution here in our region is UL. So this census tract sits literally at the gateway of this university, and that kind of explains how this Opportunity Zone prospectus got its name. And this was the first one that I got to work on as a new employee back in 2019. The Invest Acadiana initiative got national recognition. We were listed as one of the Forbes top 20 catalysts, Opportunity Zone catalysts, and this garnered some attention from the White House, Opportunity Zone Revitalization Council. It's a mouthful, but we got a visit in August of 2019 from the folks up at the White House, and they got to visit and tour some of our disinvested areas, and that was really beneficial for us. Anytime you can kind of get that national, recognition, and it's a good thing. So as a result of that, and the prior work that Invest Acadiana did, we applied through the Delta Regional Authority, for a grant to continue this work. And that resulted in 7 more prospectuses, which was a huge lift, especially for me, a new employee coming out of landscape architecture, you know. So how are we gonna put all these together? This is when we had a presentation from WealthWorks, and it changed everything. So we had a new methodology introduced to us that just made so much sense on organizing community assets into some deliverable, whether that be a website or a document or a vision. And we took it and ran with it, and it's still around today. So we're probably around 2020 at this point. And we had these rural communities that we produced the prospectuses for. Melissa already gave an overview of the WealthWorks capitals. I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with it, so I won't focus on this, but I will show you how we applied it to these prospectuses. We said, okay, we want to start off with our introduction, show some local support, give a little bit of information about the region and the parish and then the community, and kind of broke it down on that granular level. And then we dive straight into the capitals. And it was kind of awesome. It was my first round of doing true community engagement, but it also happened to be right when COVID hit. So everything switched to digital. And what we did is we put together a series of Zoom meetings with each of the communities that you see here that we produce these prospectuses for. We identified a local champion who would be able to speak to the assets of their community and had them help us invite the people that they thought would be relevant to the conversation to the table. And we went through each of these capitals and just had a open table discussion on what do you have in your region that you consider an asset when it comes to cultural, and we gave them a breakdown of examples to get the ideas going, but really it was them giving us what they thought they had, and they take a lot of pride in their community, so it was great to hear it from a local voice. And it at the same time, in retrospect, kind of serves as a need assessment because they were also telling us the things that they wish they had. So we were able to make note of that for future reference. And then in the back, we, got into the nitty gritty of all the tax investment opportunities. But these started off as a way to promote the opportunity zones, but what they ended up being was a marketing tool for each of these communities that they were able to use and show people who are interested in the tourism could look and see what the natural and cultural assets are. People who were interested in developing in that area could look and see what the built infrastructure looks like and who they need to call for certain things. So I won't spend too much time on these because we want to get to the CEDS, but I'll just briefly show some snippets that came from these prospectuses. Individual capital, we got to discuss the workforce, the people that live in that community and who make it what it is. The intellectual capital, your educational initiatives, the local colleges, local workforce programs at the high schools, things like that. The cultural capital, we definitely have a lot of that here in Louisiana. There is a festival every time. Your calendar's always going to have something on it. But it was really cool to be able to say regionally, like, okay, now we have a full list of all the different festivals in our region. Natural capital, we gave recreation opportunities, state parks. What do the people do to have fun outdoors in your area? Built capital, we were looking at all kinds of stuff. This ended up being one of the thickest capitals to discuss because we were looking at historic and cultural districts, ports, airports, roads, utilities, and we tried to give, to the best of our ability, contact information for utilities so that, like I said, if a developer wants to come in, they can take this prospectus and be like, okay, this is what we have, this is what we need to do, who we need to get in contact with. Political capital, This one kind of is tricky because especially when you have an elected official on the call with you and their community and you start asking them, so what are your political assets? The mayor's just kind of like, oh no. But what it ended up being was a resource that we were able to show this is your local government structure, and give them, the reader a little bit of those resources. And then we get into the financial capital to show who are the economic partners, besides ourselves and our regional chamber of commerce, parish economic development organizations, tourism, Main Street programs, and a list of local financial institutions. So that was the gist of those prospectuses. So now we'll move a couple of years later on to the CEDS. I'm sure you are all very familiar with the CEDS, but here's a brief explanation in case someone is new to the topic. It's a 5-year plan put in place by the Economic Development Administration that is meant for EDDs to guide the development and best practices in planning. Here's the cover of our CEDS. We finished it up and we were very proud of it. And I'm going to walk you through kind of the thought behind it and the process that we took to get a completed document. So we started off by looking at, okay, what are our methodology options here? I was very familiar with the SWOT analysis coming out of landscape architecture school. Anytime you have a new project, you do an inventory analysis and it's the same thing. It's analytical. You're looking at typically qualitative data. But then we also have the WealthWorks, which, it just lays everything out so perfectly. So how do we find the commonalities? And that's what we really tried to do. And what we ended up doing is really applying the WealthWorks model rather than outlining the entire document by WealthWorks, because EDA does have some, guidelines on how they want their document organized. So we were like, well, we want to do WealthWorks, but how do we do it? So we applied WealthWorks mostly at the strategy meetings with our stakeholders. And we found a way to put SWOT and asset mapping together, which we'll get to. So we had 3 meetings. The first one was kind of looking at our region in the last 5 years. What do we have? What are our big wins? What do you think puts us on the map? The second meeting was when we got down into the very specific information. And we broke our SWOT analysis up by the 8 capitals. So we started off and we said, okay, we're going to talk first about, let's just say, natural capital. What are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for this capital category? And we went through each of these. And then meeting number 3 was like, okay, we have all of the information gathered on where we have been, where we are now. Now let's talk about what do we want to see in the next 5 years. Those meetings were crucial for informing the development of our CEDS. So here's just an image of one of the stakeholder engagement meetings we had, and a list of the folks that were invited. Obviously, we would love to have input from as many stakeholders as possible, but we really felt like these were the critical ones that were key players in having this conversation. In combination with these community engagement meetings, we also did a round of surveys that went with each meeting. So before the meeting, about a week before, we would send out a survey and say, okay, let's get an idea of, in this example, economic diversification and growth. And we actually took the goals and objectives from the previous CEDS and used those to help inform what these survey questions would be. And then we got to actually get down and write the CEDS, which was a huge task. So I'll just guide you through some of the major sections. We discussed our regional wins, again, going back to that first meeting. We looked at our infrastructure investments, private and capital investments, quality of life, business, jobs. And then we discuss as an organization, as a planning district and a federal economic development district, what do we bring to the table? Why are we the ones doing this? So we show, you know, the number of dollars that we've leveraged, grants, the number of projects to really show the impact that our organization is having. And then we showed a couple of handful of examples of, you know, some key projects. Some are more construction and structural based. Some are more, you know, cluster and employment based, land use. There's different things in there. Then we gave an overall economic profile of our region. You know, what are we looking at by the numbers, and what are our assets? So you can see how some of the prospectuses and the way we had like everything built out into built categories, we reorganized it to fit this economic profile. And that was a challenge. We really had to sit there with literally pens and paper, storyboarding out like, okay, where does it make the most sense to discuss this topic? And there were some moving things around, but after the economic profile, we got into the SWOT analysis. And this is more looking at the data that we pulled out of those meetings and saying, okay, here's the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats for each capital as a whole. And then we took the results of that SWOT analysis and broke them out into a new set of goals and objectives for the next 5 years. This section of the document was very long because we have a lot of goals and a lot of objectives and a lot of work to do. But that in the gist of it is how we were able to use WealthWorks in combination with other methodologies to do this regional document. And that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions y'all have now, or if we'd rather wait until the end of the presentations, whatever works best.
Thanks, Kade. Yeah, I think we can take a question or two now if people have them, but if not, we can move forward. Any questions, feel free to either put them in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. We can be pretty casual here. Anything on anybody's minds? Okay.
Okay, well, thank you, Melissa, and looking
Yeah.
forward to the next presentation.
Excellent. Thanks, Kade. And yeah, if you can probably unshare your screen, we can get Eric up there. So I'm really excited to introduce Eric Smith, who's the Executive Director of Community Works and a Program Extension Associate around Community and Economic Development for Central State University's Cooperative Extension Service. Eric has done a lot of really interesting things over his career, including in a lot of different places, including in Uganda, Central Appalachia, and the Rust Belt cities, urban neighborhoods of Rust Belt cities. And so I'm really excited to kind of hear some of the stories he's going to tell about how he's been integrating kind of wealth creation concepts into his work. So thanks, Eric. I'll leave it to you. You're muted, Eric.
Great. How about now?
Excellent.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And also, Kay, just really appreciate that presentation. Tough act to follow. So I'll do my best, but really appreciate that. Let's see, is my presentation, is it coming up okay?
Looks good.
Okay, all right. So again, thank you, everyone. Appreciate being here. And I just want to share a little bit from my journey into kind of a place-based wealth building career that's spanned 20 years. I'm on a mission, working to ignite flourishing communities where all people can thrive, and that would capitalize all. It's really important to me. That careers spanned African villages, Appalachian towns, Rust Belt cities, neighborhoods. And so I want to share a few stories about that. And I'm going to invite you to come with me. And this is a picture from Uganda, actually, one of the great places I've worked. But I want to invite you to come along this journey with me as we stop in a few places to key in on a few topics that I think are really critical as we think about wealth works as a strategy. So when you go in and you know, Kate really set us up for this really well, talking about wealth building in a region and talking about the 8 different forms of capital you might think about, or 8 different categories of wealth. When you do go to that website that Melissa shared, you'll see a manual on there. And it starts off like this. It says, if you live in the Rocky Mountains or along the upper shores of Lake Michigan, you and your neighbors share a wealth of natural beauty and amenities. This wealth may be the reason you choose to live where you do. Men and women with long experience working in local industries have a wealth of skills and creativity. People who have attended college or specialized training have wealth of knowledge. Towns that have a range of community-wide activities and active civic groups have a wealth of connections. Children with access to affordable and preventative pediatric care have health as a type of wealth. So there's all different kinds of wealth, and every community has wealth. Every region, every town, every neighborhood, every block has capital and assets to work with. And I think a lot of times the biggest issue we have is our own perspective, our paradigm, the lens through which we see the world. And sometimes we discount the wealth that's there. And so I want to focus on 3 key principles that are woven into the WealthWorks model. And the first one is this: the quality and quantity of wealth embedded in 8 different types of capital. You want to build all 8 types of capital without doing harm to any one of them. And to help illustrate this and the power of a new land, I want to invite you to join me as we go to the town of Holland, Michigan. Within city limits, about 35,000, about 130,000 in the statistical area between Holland and Zeeland. So you might say there's a great wealth here in terms of natural capital. It's on right on the coast of Lake Michigan, beautiful, pristine, and you've got a cultural wealth, long, as you might imagine, long history of Dutch influence, and so they are well known for their annual tulip festival that hundreds of thousands of people come to on a week in the spring. Drop the tourism dollars into the local economy. But as you can imagine, not every community, not every region, and not every neighborhood or subsection of that region experiences wealth the same way. And so I want to invite you to come with me. You're going to join me in my car. I'm going to be driving down 16th Street in Holland until we hit the 27th West 16th Street, which is the home office for 360. And 360 is the Community Development Corporation serving the Eastport neighborhood. And what you'll notice is the Eastport neighborhood, when you're driving through, you've got lots of murals up. There's lots of olive gardens with flowers and lots of landscaping and beautiful things going on. And so when we hit 360 and we start talking to Lori, your village pictured on your left of the screen, you start to share with her, wow, this must be a really vibrant neighborhood, right? I'm seeing people interacting, lots of murals, lots of activity, lots of pop-up.
Eric?
And yes.
There's a kind of a weird echo. Yeah, I'm not sure what's up. Multiple mics catching the sound. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that's about. I don't know if I'm not even sure how to fix it, but I thought I'd mention it. It's just becoming a little hard to hear you. Yeah, someone's mentioning that there might be multiple mics catching the sound, and I guess I don't know how to figure that out. I'm sorry. I know sometimes I don't know. Yeah. I don't know how to fix it, but I don't know if you have multiple mics that might be catching it. I don't know if that's true, but I know sometimes when I have a couple of different like webinars kind of apps open, sometimes that happens. Oh, yeah, I guess maybe making sure everybody's on mute might help too. Sorry to interrupt, Eric.
No, I apologize. If that's
Yeah, I
Are
don't know.
you still hear it?
Yeah,
Maybe stop and come back in?
yeah, let's try that. I guess it can't hurt. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, I apologize. And maybe now's a great time before I thought of a question, Kade. That'll be
That's true.
best part time anyways, so.
We can see if anybody wants to ask questions of Kade while we're fixing this. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, any questions for Kade while we're waiting for Eric to get back on? I really, the Acadiana story I find very compelling, and I think it's really exciting to see an EDD really using those forms of wealth and kind of throughout the CEDS. That's something that I don't know how I found them, but I did, and it was I've been talking about them ever since. So, and using them as an example to set for folks. So yeah, I'm pretty, and the prospectuses too. I was pretty excited when I found those. I kind of discovered what Acadiana was doing. So thank you Kade for doing that, for sharing that. Cause yeah, Kade actually sent me an early copy of the CEDS before it was released, and it was very, very exciting. So yeah. And I've been talking about it since. So it's really nicely laid out, and it really utilizes those 8 capitals in interesting ways. So, yeah. So I can also talk about, while Eric's getting back on, I can also talk about, like I said, I just figured out the dates for it. It's going to be, our next webinar is going to be Wednesday, September 25th at 2:00. I haven't done any of the promotion for it, but we're going to be talking about sector-based strategies. So ways that EDDs can serve as conveners and facilitators I'm going to make, let's see. Okay. Yeah, anyway, ways that EDDs and others are working to convene and facilitate sectors to work together more effectively for mutual benefit. So I'm super excited about that too. Yeah, anyway, so put it on your calendar and you'll be getting something from me before too long with the details. Eric, you're back.
I am. How do I sound?
Much better.
Okay.
You're all set. Sorry about that.
No
It's so
worries.
funny.
Yeah.
Okay. Back
Oh,
to you.
let's get back into it. All right. So anyways, we were talking about Lori, I think. So we'll pick up there. And when you mentioned how vibrant the neighborhood seemed to be, and we talked to her, you're going to see her face light up, but eyes get almost teary, right? And why is that? Because 3 years ago, she walked the neighborhood, LA, knocked on all 800 households, asked them the magic wand question: if this was a great place to live, what would it look like? And what she got as a pattern across all those conversations, this is just one piece of a inventory process or an asset mapping process, right? People clearly in this neighborhood, right, felt they weren't well received, and they were connected to the larger community. And as a result, things looked a little bit run down in the neighborhood, and they wanted that to change. And the next thing you know, she's thinking about this, and she bumps into Chris at the checkout counter, which is where a lot of good community development work happens, right, at the local grocery store. And find out Chris is a hobbyist in muraling. And so was born the mural festival. Action team comes together, and all kinds of murals are popping up now. They do a mural fest once a year where they get 4 or so murals up, and it's attracted national attention. And in fact, we came to this neighborhood because it just last month won the Neighborhood of the Year award by NUSA, the Neighborhoods USA. So that's one way of, this is Lori. The greatest gift she brings is to look at, here's this built capital that people are looking at as being run down, but no, she looked at it as this is a canvas, and working with human capital, the skills and talents of local artists, and the people who were willing to commit time to pull this off, to get funds, etc. And so I think that's just a picture of what it looks like to flip our lens and start to think of things in terms of assets. Then, of course, the second piece of this methodology, this framework, is it talks about the local ownership and control of the wealth by regions, people, places, and firms. And so for this, I want to ask you, we're going to leave 16th Street and Holland. We're going to board a plane, and we're going to fly off to Uganda. We're going to land in Kampala. Then we're going to start taking a road up to the village of Kuchwin. And so we're driving down, and it's a beautiful day and gorgeous mud red path, green, clear skies, so wonderful. And we end up in the village of Kuchwin, and we're joining me here on this journey, and we meet Mr. and Mrs. Adiwat. And they're part of Kuchwin village, and the kids are out, of course, to watch us because this is a fascinating adventure for them. And so Mr. and Mrs. Adiwat, they're there and they're explaining that it's been hard to send their kids to school because of school fees. It's been hard to get food for the kids over the summer or the dry season because it's hard for your food to last through the not growing season. And so you ask that question, what do you think you have that you can build on? And it turns out that they have an old small coffee farm. They still sometimes tend to, but it turns out back in the 80s, the coffee farm industry in Uganda, certainly in the Nebi district in Uganda, collapsed because Idi Amin came in. Markets were unsecure. What was happening? There was a lot of destabilization, and now at this point, they can barely make enough off of selling their coffee grounds or coffee beans to make up for the cost of the inputs. It's almost a net neutral, almost a negative. Well, by asking that question and wondering what the assets are in their local region, we find out that in fact, there's a cluster of 11 villages, each with several farms, coffee farms. And so, they started to come together, and you can see one of our meetings we had, where they decided to build a cooperative. And so they jointly agreed to, we're going to all follow these certain practices so that we can sell at our best price as a naturally grown product without lots of pesticides and those kinds of things. And then we're not going to sell individually because most of the money was going to the people who could transport the food, the middlemen who would buy the grounds from each individual family farm and then take it to Kampala and make a pretty big profit. So instead, they agreed that as a cooperative, they would combine all their coffee beans and store it. The local government got wind of this. They provided this was existing built infrastructure, and they would store it. And then people would the lorry drivers would have to come here to make a bulk purchase. But that gave a lot of leverage, and almost overnight, the Adiwats doubled their income because they banded together, created local ownership and local control over an asset that had been there since the 80s, but that had not been fully utilized. And so that it's not that there was, a huge investment of new grants or a huge change in the wealth. The wealth was there. It was an agreement by people that, hey, we need to capitalize on what exists here that made the difference for families. And now the Adiwats were able to send their kids to school and make the money stretch through the dry season so their kids could eat 3 meals a day. So local ownership. the last thing I want to talk about is the idea of livelihoods. And this is a key element, right? Wealth building is about creating livelihoods, and even especially for those that are on the margins, move them into the mainstream, right? That's the last of the key pillars of this model. So we're going to continue a little bit with an ag story, because a lot of times value chains, a lot of times when we're learning about value chains, it's almost easiest to start with agriculture, or culture, or one of those kind of assets, natural capital, tourism. And so I'd like to invite you to come on. We're going to get back in the plane. We're going to fly to Ohio, and we're going to grab Highway 33. Then we're going to cut off on State Route 555, locally known as the Triple Nickel 555. Love that. And we're going to come to the home of the Triple Nickel Diner, Chester Hill. So Chester Hill is a small village on the foothills of Appalachia. And, about 200 people live here, call it home. And that population's been on a slide, of course, for the last generation. About 20 years ago, coal industry started to slow down. But in its place, you've got lots of local farming that's been happening. This is hilly territory, so we're talking specialty crops, small acreage, and not row crop, not traditional farming. But there's a lot of this happening, both Amish and English farmers. And so in comes an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer who is assigned to ask the question, right? What do we have? What are the assets that we have here that we can build on? And top of everybody's mind is, well, got all these local farmers. How do we support that? Because that could be our path forward, right? Sustainable local farm, local food could be our path toward economic resilience. That's where the story started. And 20 years ago, it was, Tom and the gang, holding down tents while the wind blew so that they could do a little experiment with selling some food for some local farmers in an auction format. Well, today it's a huge it's a significant complex of different structures, and a small lot produce auction, a large lot produce auction for the bigger retail and stores, and you have well over 1,000 people now coming in and buying every year from the auction. And this has become, it's been the lifeblood of a new economy for Chester Hill, but also for the region. It's hard to see the map here too well, I think, and this is an old map, needs to be updated. But in 2009, and there's been a lot of growth since then. But even in 2009, when this was starting out, we were pulling in food. People were coming in from a multi-state region to Chester Hill. Again, a small community, foothills of Appalachia. Nothing within the boundaries that makes sense in some ways, but it attracted food from across a tri-state region, several counties in Southeast Ohio, West Virginia, etc. And then you can see then the food gets distributed in all different ways. Homes, Oblinus hospitals buying it so that they can sell good, wholesome, local produce, healthy produce at through their gift shop as an antidote, as a health strategy. And the Ohio University is buying out of the produce auction. They're buying some of what they use for their campus work, campus food program. So it's going to the local tourism industry. Lodges are buying it. Tourism is a big part of Southeast Ohio's economy. But the point here is, again, we started by asking the question, what do we have to work with? What are the local assets? And then how do we build the infrastructure around that to give new life, new energy, and to unlock the power that asset has for our region? And so there's just 3 examples, I think, that kind of illustrate that key principle. And I just thank you for your time. Thank you again, Melissa, for the opportunity to speak. And again, I think Kate or I would welcome questions if you have that time. And I apologize again for the technology.
Oh, no, it's all good. Thank you so much, Eric. And yeah, let's open up to questions. I love the traveling traveling around the world, Eric. That was fun. And I also look, what great stories. I mean, I knew about Chester Hill, but the others were definitely new to me. So thank you. And yeah, I was saying in the chat that I got to visit Chester Hill, I think, with Rural Action when I was visiting there, and it was really impressive. I mean, it's quite an event and it's quite a community event I've never seen anything like that before. It was pretty exciting. So, yeah, any questions for Kade or Eric or anything on people's minds, any ideas? I'm going to stop talking, but yeah, please feel free oh, that could be. I think we were there together, Carrie. That's so funny. Yeah, any questions? Put them in the chat or unmute and just have at it. Anything about the SEDS, or I love how Kade talked about kind of the planning component, and then Eric really talked about kind of operationalizing. So pat myself on the back for figuring these two guys out, for having them share. It worked out perfectly. So thank you. Yeah. Well, I'll ask a quick question of Kade, actually. Like, I'm wondering, like, now that you have the SEDS completed, are there particular strategies that you're really excited about moving forward? I know it's pretty new, but are there particular things that you're excited to jump into?
Honestly, Melissa, the biggest thing that I took away from the whole process was, and this came up during one of the community or the stakeholder engagement meetings, is you have all these organizations like chambers of commerce and elected officials, planning commissions, economic development orgs, all operating within the same realm, but it's really easy for them to get siloed and to operate without collaborating and discussing it with each other. And the
Yeah.
reality is all these people pretty much know each other. So it came up during the meeting, and it was kind of like a come to Jesus moment where everybody was like, we need to get better at relying on each other for each other's assets and strengths, and not duplicating efforts where we don't need to. So I think regional partnerships and collaboration is probably the biggest takeaway. So to answer your question on what do I look forward to the most, and kind of like the what happens next part, is following up and saying, hey, you remember that meeting that we had where everybody said we need to play nice and work together? And so I'm thinking of ways to not make this an every 5-year thing, but to make this a conversation that occurs more frequently, and that people are remembering, oh, we did have a 5-year goal, that even though my organization didn't produce it, that is something I agree with as a stakeholder that put input into this. So, I would like to contribute and commit to that goal as a regional partner. So I think that is a critical piece, and that is something we discussed, potentially holding, an annual follow-up meeting or a webinar or something to keep the conversation going.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's really exciting. Yeah, and I think that leads me to think about sectors, like certainly in Eric's example with the coffee, coffee producers coming together for mutual benefit. That's something we'll be talking about in the next webinar. And I think those collaborations that you're talking about, Kade, kind of lead there also, have the potential to lead there. And I know that other EDDs are thinking about that. Carrie's.
Can I say real quick? I know you're going to question that's more important than this. I don't know, Kate, what you've experienced, but I think we undervalue the power of maps. Right? Hey, you guys all have access to like big printers. Print off maps when you can, put it up there and say, because then people are asking themselves the question, how will this place be different? This region, this community, how will it be different because we're here? And that's a different way of thinking. It helps break us away from the silos a little bit. So that's just a small tidbit for,
Yeah, I love
free
that.
tip.
Yeah, that's
Thank,
great.
go ahead, Kate. I'm sorry.
So I see a question, somewhat of a related question. What strategies are there for prioritization? I guess specifically prioritization in what sense of the term? In prioritizing goals and objectives as part of the SEDS.
I think so.
That's a really good question. I think that is something that we need to discuss internally and say, okay, we have all these goals and objectives. And I mean, it's like pages and pages of goals and objectives. And
Mhm.
how do we transform that from pages and pages written in a document to something that is tangible and actionable? You know what? If we have the opportunity to discuss again, I hope I have a better answer for you. But for right now, I'm going to say it needs to be someone who is going to champion it and sit down with it and say, these are the objectives. Let's start building out strategies and strategic partnerships to brainstorm at the very first step. I guess that would be the first step, is brainstorming with the partners to figure out how to make this happen. And so, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, great. And I know that Carrie asked a question about to others. Have you seen the kind of regional partner commitment that Cade's talking about in your own work? And what does it look like? And how do you keep people engaged? Anyone want to contribute kind of how may see that in their own regions or communities?
I'm going to add a little bit to what Kate said, though, about our SEDS. This is Alice Clark with Acadiana Planning Commission. I mean, we're tracking what's going on in our SEDS, and as we are partnering with individual entities, noting that and building sort of from zero up to where we're going with it. And we have made some strides with our university partners in particular, and continue to do so with our other partners. But our internal tracking probably needs to be a little stronger. But it
Right.
is happening. It's not that it's not happening. It's not the tracking, it's the mechanism. Sort of more like we're checking it off as it's happening versus letting the SEDS drive the activity.
Great. Thanks, Allison. Okay, any other questions? I know that this is let some of you may drop off, and I hope you don't, but we're going to do a breakout, a quick breakout, like 10 minutes, just to like chit chat about, how people might think about, thinking about focusing on assets in your own region. And so I think Dion is going to send us into breakout groups just to chat, just chit chat with your colleagues and chat about how this plays out in your individual regions. So I hope you'll stay on. It's not too much longer. And then, like I said, there's going to be a survey once you do leave. I hope you'll fill it out. I am thinking, I guess while Dion is doing that, I am thinking about kind of a virtual training series. So just keep your eyes open for that. Not everybody can come to Greenville, where Carrie and I are going to be doing some cool training. And so I was actually thinking about developing a cohort where people can do the training virtually over the course of several months with their own communities, and actually work through the WealthWorks process with us. So anyway, keep your eyes out for that. Eric, you had your hand up. What's up?
Just very quickly before you go to breakout, just a quick tool that I think maybe could tie the last couple of questions together would be do an action form, right? Don't sit in a room somewhere and prioritize. Call out the community, whatever, Pollock, I don't know, whatever it is, get people in the room, say, here's all the things, put them on flip chart, give everybody 3 sticky dots, and they have to make a vote where would they prioritize? The ones that get the most prioritization, then you say, okay, now you got to self-nominate which committee you're going to be on, right?
Right?
We all agree these are the, we voted with our feet. These are the 3 priorities or whatever. And who's going to work on these. And so before they leave, you try to get people to commit, but that helps the engagement down the road because it's not just you, it's not just your office, it's a committee of citizens and interested partners and stakeholders who are helping to carry this forward. That helps with engagement.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, I love that going where the enthusiasm is. I know certainly when I'm talking about value chains, it's like that's one of the biggest criteria is where is the energy and the enthusiasm in the region and the community. So I appreciate that. Thanks, Eric. Okay, so yeah, I think Dion, we're ready when you are, and we can put the question in the chat for you. And we'll take 10 minutes. So maybe just do introductions and chat about how you might use the capitals to focus on assets in your own regions.